Hello, and welcome back to Seek the Joy podcast. Happy Seek the Joy Tuesday. I'm your host, Sydney Weiss, and today's episode is our end of year recap. It's the episode where I reflect on the last year, both for the podcast and for myself. And if you can tell by the title, and just like that, it's our 2021 recap. Yes, I am watching the Sex and the City reboot. Yes, I have a lot of opinions. I don't know if I'm sharing them in today's episode, but if you're tuning in, please message me because I just don't know how I feel about this reboot, but that's not the point of this episode. The point of this episode is to reflect, I think, on the last year and also what I've learned in the last few months since taking some time away from the podcast. I don't know for you, but for me, 2021 was a year of hope and forward movement, but at times it also felt like a year of taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, depending on the day and the month and where we were at with the pandemic and everything else in between. And it's interesting because I'm recording this literally on December 22nd. So we're still very much in the middle of this pandemic. We're all still experiencing loss and burnout and total exhaustion. And loss, burnout, and total exhaustion were 3 reasons why I took some time away from the podcast and from sharing brand new episodes with you. And let me just say, like 2 minutes in, this is by no means intended to be a downer of an episode, but I do think it's important to recognize that as we close out this year, as we close out really like 2 years of this pandemic and everything that we've experienced as a result, there's been a lot of highs and a lot of joyful moments and opportunities for celebration, but then there's been a lot of lows too. And so I'm excited to spend a little time with you after 11 weeks away, which, by the way, time really flew. So much happened in those 11 weeks, but I'm excited to share, I think, what this past year has taught me and the impact of my time away from the podcast, and then also what's next for Seek the Joy and me, but really for Seek the Joy as we enter 2022. And so back in October, after we celebrated the 4-year anniversary of Seek the Joy podcast, I decided to take some time away. I knew I was burned out because I felt it, but it really wasn't until I stopped recording new episodes and really being fully immersed in all things podcast that I realized just how burned out I was. And I think, truthfully, 11 weeks later, I'm still burned out. I'm still really tired. I'm still overwhelmed. But at the same time, I have a renewed sense of energy and focus and excitement around the podcast and this work, but also my own creativity and expression. And so if I can share one of the big things I learned about myself through taking this break, is that breaks need to become a necessary part of what I do. And breaks need to become a necessary part of this podcast. Because for 4 years, I was pushing out content like literally every week, sometimes twice a week, and I had the best time doing it, but I didn't realize that I was so tired and so overwhelmed and so exhausted. And part of this too, for me, in taking the break, was learning to become more mindful for myself in the moment. And so to be more mindful in the moment means that we have to slow down. But there's a lot of fear and ambivalence and uncertainty and discomfort around validating, for me at least, that need to slow down, that need to hit pause, that need to take a break. Sometimes I feel like there's a lot of fear around validating difficult feelings. And I recognized, I think it had to be over the summer, and sort of around the time when my grandma passed away in August, that I was equating my own need for care or my own need for self-care with how much I was producing. And I recognized I was falling back into this old, tried and true and tested trap that I think we all fall in from time to time, where we think we have to work a certain amount to deserve the care that we want to give ourselves, to deserve the time off, the time away. And so I started to think, how can I start to allow myself to recognize that I'm more than enough as I am right now, and the amount that I produce or create will not and should not and does not need to justify the rest that I'm giving myself. And it reminded me so much of the conversation that I had with Megan Watson earlier this year that I then reshared with all of you as part of our Best Of series, where she talks so much in that episode. And please go back and listen to it if you haven't already tuned in, or if you need a refresher. She talks so much about how can we start to take these productivity metrics and measurements out of the equation when it comes to taking better care of ourselves and actually resting. And there's something else that she says in that episode that I continue to talk about, which is knowing the difference between enough rest and the rest that you want. And I thought that was so interesting because I sleep 8 hours a night, sometimes 7, sometimes 9. I exercise almost daily. I'm taking care of my body. But I wasn't taking care of my mind. I wasn't taking care of my soul. I wasn't experiencing the kind of rest that I wanted or really needed to continue to nourish myself through this creative process and through this creative journey with the podcast and with connecting with all of you. And so one of the big things I've learned is that taking care of myself and nourishing myself and allowing myself to rest or take a break is going to be a necessary part of who I am. And I'm still working on, not going to lie, I am still working on exactly how I can continue to focus on nourishing myself. And I'm also still working on knowing when it's time to get out there again and create and connect again and re-enter these spaces. And so that's been huge for me, is wanting to dive back in. I wanted to dive back in a month ago, to be honest, but I recognized that I wasn't quite ready yet. I needed a little bit more time. And so being able to gauge not only when I need rest, but also when it's time to jump back in again has been a really interesting journey. And so rest in this time for me has meant actually showing up for myself in ways that I wasn't doing, which meant honestly unplugging from social media for the podcast, unplugging from the podcast emails, unplugging from scheduling new guests. I wasn't planning new episodes. I wasn't creating new content. I wasn't sharing anything. And it's been really interesting because not showing up through the podcast, not creating, not expressing, not sharing, really illuminated this really interesting fact that I've known but wasn't paying the most attention to, which is that we really can't show up as who we really are. I couldn't really show up as who I really am in my life if I'm stretched too thin, if I'm burnt out, if I feel overextended. And it made me think, was I showing up in the ways that I wanted to in these conversations, in these interviews? And I would say most of the time, yes. And then other times, not so much. And so as I've explored rest for myself over the last 11 weeks, it's just illuminated this huge theme for me in my life right now, which is just being self-aware enough to know when I need to rest and being self-aware enough to know what boundaries I don't have and what boundaries I need to create and how I want to move forward. And to be honest, at first glance, I didn't think that choosing my rest would actually bring me joy, because it meant taking a break from the podcast and this community that I've created through Joy Corner and Seek the Joy and Stories of Inspiring Joy. But truthfully, it has been exactly what I've needed. And I'm so grateful that I made the decision to take a break. I've loved sharing these best of episodes with all of you. And I think maybe the final takeaway I want to share from the last 11 weeks is that this period of rest, if we can allow ourselves to take one, even if it's 24 hours, even if it's a weekend, or if it's 11 weeks away from doing something, I think it's really important to reframe rest as this greater opportunity to figure out how you can fuel your tank back up again so that creating is fun again, and being more intentional and thoughtful in the moment and standing in your own integrity, I think too, to make decisions around your own creativity and capacity and bandwidth and how much energy that you have in any given moment. And so I guess it's safe to say the last 11 weeks have been really interesting. And I'm really grateful, honestly, for the opportunity to reflect and share these reflections with you. But I have to be honest, like even 11 weeks later, I'm still feeling burned out and I'm still tired. I think at this point, it's somewhat of an inherent part of who I am. I don't really want to claim that, but I think we've been through a lot over the last couple of years, and I also work full time in addition to doing the podcast. But I will say, like, I have a renewed energy and focus and excitement around the conversations and the podcast and this community and my own creativity and expression, which I'm really excited and grateful for. And so, as we enter 2022, there are definitely some significant changes that I'm making, and I want to share them with you because I want you to know what you can expect from me and Seek the Joy podcast and this platform, I guess, in the next year. And so moving forward, Joy Corner, which is our interview style blog series on the website, it used to go live every Thursday, 2 features every Thursday. Moving forward, Joy Corner is going to be shared twice a month instead of every week. Stories of Inspiring Joy, which is our sister podcast, used to have new episodes on Mondays and Thursdays, and now we're just going to have new episodes on Mondays. And then a new episode of Seek the Joy will come out 3 times a month instead of 4. So once a month, I'll be taking a break week where I don't share a new episode. And I gotta be honest, I'm feeling a little nervous about these changes, but they feel like really good and necessary changes. And I told myself that I would reevaluate after, I think like March or April, like the first quarter of the year, and see how I'm feeling. Because honestly, even just by cutting this content in half, I'm still not totally sure if I'm honoring my bandwidth and what I can handle in the way that I want to, but I'm going to evaluate and see how it goes. And even though I feel nervous about it and I recognize that it's important, for me, it also just feels like a really good opportunity to just be more mindful of the ways in which I share content on this platform moving forward. And to me, that just feels really, really good. So changing directions just a little bit, moving away from reflections from the last 11 weeks. And now I want to talk a little bit about some of the highlights from this past year, because it's been a pretty cool year. So I held our first ever Seek the Joy Summit back in April 2021. I launched and shared our first ever summer series, which was, I loved it. And the feedback from all of you shouted from the rooftops that you also loved it. But I think the biggest highlight for me over the last year has to be just the constant connection with all of you and this community. And I haven't really talked too much about this, but the countless podcasts that invited me and welcomed me on their show to share more about my journey and the journey of Seek the Joy was just a huge honor. There were like 40 different podcasts I was on in the last 2 years, maybe. I should probably count. I'm not totally sure, but it was a lot. And so that was really cool too, just to have the opportunity to connect with other podcasters and talk about Seek the Joy and meet other women in this space. But I also just can't get over the conversations that we had on Seek the Joy this past year. Our first episode of 2021 was with Larry L. Lipkins about creating a roadmap for the year ahead and aligning our goals with our vision. And then we had conversations with incredible entrepreneurs and authors like Lauren Martin, Leah Dean, AJ Sarcioni, Brandon Posavac, Lindsay Gardner, Melissa Bernstein of Melissa and Doug Toy Company, Molly Galbraith, Dolores Hirschman, Melody Wilding, and Andrea Owen. And then we dove into female friendships with Danielle Bayard Jackson, which is a topic I definitely want to explore more in 2022. We had conversations on wellness and mindfulness with Megan Watson, Kelsey Abbott, Liv Bowser, Britt Deanda, and Tara Skollenberg of Elevate the Globe, Allie French and Erica Stein of Courageous Wellness, Veronica Grant, Jessica Suarez, Chef Amber, Ruth Elnikave, Vasavi Kumar, and Scott Shute. Wait, hold on, I've got more. We then explored astrology and self-care with Sarah McCormick, the Enneagram with Christina Wilcox and Varen Rao. We explored our creativity with Leah Van Doren. We had this awesome conversation about our dreams with Athena Laz and the Akashic Records with Lisa Barnett. We focused on our breath this year with Anna Lilia and became better listeners with Jimena Vengoechea. We had an incredible Seek the Joy summer with Josephine Atlury, Haley Cole, Ashley Sondergaard, Cara Latta, Helen Joy Butler, Vinay McGee, and Phoebe Leona and Leah Onayan. We explored grief with Krista Couture and Kat Peters. And then we celebrated 4 years of Seek the Joy podcast. And over the last 3 months, I've been sharing some of my favorite episodes from the past 4 years. And this has just been an incredible year, an incredible journey. And I just have to thank every single guest who came on the podcast this year, every single person who shared their story on Stories of Inspiring Joy, every single person who shared their work, their joys, and their passion on Joy Corner. I'm just so grateful. And to every single person that participated, either as a speaker or attendee at Seek the Joy Summit, I don't know if I'll ever be able to tap the high of that day and those sessions. So thank you to everybody. And thank you to all of you for tuning in and listening over the last year, over the last 4 years. When sharing our 4-year anniversary episode back in October, I talked about how the phrase for me for year 4, the phrase that came to mind at the time was joyful resilience. And I've been thinking a lot about that word. Because in a lot of ways, as we close out 2021, I feel like that phrase is also going to ring true for 2022, because this past year, it tested me. It rocked me in some ways. It brought immense sadness, but also incredible, incredible joy. But I learned so much about me this past year from experiences, from other people, from challenges, and I just cannot imagine my life without all of you, my life without this podcast, without this platform. I can't imagine not sitting down to have just these incredible, thought-provoking, impactful, powerful, and light bulb-inducing conversations. And over the last couple of weeks, I've started to have these conversations again. And something within me, I just felt it light back up again, which has just shown me that this podcast and these conversations and the opportunity to share is just an integral part, I think, of who I am. And I'm just so excited and so grateful to keep going. I think the last thing I just want to say before I wrap up this end of year 2021 reflection episode is that if you experienced discomfort this year, you are not alone. I don't think we talk enough about discomfort and what comes from discomfort. And for me, discomfort feels like a lot of different things. It can mean taking new risks. It can mean experiencing different types of loss, struggles with my own mental health. It can be celebrations. Joy can sometimes feel uncomfortable. I can feel discomfort in those moments of joy and celebrating myself too. But I think there's a huge gift within discomfort. And if we choose patience, with ourselves, it can lead to developing greater trust, which can lead to you feeling capable or more capable of navigating those moments of discomfort. It's not easy. I am not an expert in self-compassion. Ask any of my friends and family. That we know for sure. But as new experiences and new opportunities presented themselves to me this year, even through loss, even through discomfort, even through grief and joy, really, I kept asking myself, what is this moment? What is this feeling of discomfort? What is this thing here to teach me? Truthfully, a lot. And the last year has really taught me a lot about discomfort. And I have found that when we allow ourselves to sit in those feelings of discomfort, there's a greater possibility really for new beginnings, because it's within that space that you're allowing yourself to grow and stretch and push beyond what you know or what you feel you're capable of in that moment. And a big thought I kept having, truthfully, over the last 11 weeks, and really over the last year or 2 years, is how do we appreciate the moments as they're becoming memories? Because if you're so lost in your own discomfort in the moment, you're distracted, right? You're not thinking about the present moment. You're not allowing yourself to remain in what is. You're thinking about how you feel and how you're going to feel and how you're going to react and how this is going to impact something else. And so I think this goes back to what I said at the very beginning of this episode, that for me, rest meant being more mindful in the moment. And to be more mindful in the moment means that we have to slow down. And when we slow down and when we hit pause, and I so hope you're taking some time right now during the holiday time between Christmas and the New Year to slow down and hit pause. And when we do that, and for me, the last 11 weeks have shown me this, but when you slow down and hit pause, you allow yourself to stretch beyond your comfort zone. And it may not feel intuitive to say this, but trust me on it. You allow yourself, I think, to stretch beyond your comfort zone, and in doing so, it kind of becomes this exercise. And in releasing your fears and realizing, this one is huge for me, realizing that you are not your fears, which maybe there's a future episode on that topic alone. So as we enter 2022, and for me, it's an attempt to enter this new year with my feet planted firmly on the ground and truthfully still in need of a lot more sleep, I also just hope you'll take some time to reflect on what this past year has taught you. I know last year in our end of year reflection episode, I shared some questions with you, some journaling prompt type questions, and there's a couple of them that for me still feel so relevant, present. I don't know what the right word is, but I want to share them with you here again because I think they're so helpful. So the first one is, what is one thing you want to do that you want to be, feel, or experience in 2022? And then if you could pick a word for 2021, this past year, what would it be? And then on the flip side, if you could pick a word for 2022, a word that captures how you want to feel, what you want to experience, and I think how you want to show up and what you want to share in the world, what would it be? I'm going to share my responses to these questions in next week's episode, because next week's episode is also going to be a solo episode. So get ready, get excited. Part of me stretching beyond my comfort zone means I'm going to do some more solo episodes every now and then. But it has been a really interesting year, a really powerful year, a really transformative year, a heart-opening year. And I'm so grateful that we've been on this journey together. And I can't thank you enough for being part of this community. The last thing I want to share with you, I think really as we say goodbye to 2021 and enter 2022, I want to share with you that I have the really incredible honor and privilege to be part of Kelly Collins' virtual retreat, Year of You. It's taking place January 6th through 9th, and I would love it if you would attend. It is totally free, or you can also make a donation. And my session is really focused on self-care, rest, self-awareness, and boundaries. So in a lot of ways, it's a bit of an expansion on what I shared with you in today's new episode. And I first met Kelly back in 2020. We were on each other's podcasts. I have just loved staying in touch with her. I consider her to be one of my favorite people in this wellness space. And so when she reached out and shared that she was doing Year of You again in 2022, not only did I know that I wanted to make sure I shared it with you, but I was also just so incredibly honored to be part of it. This year, the themes are awareness, healing, balance, and inspired action. You will hear from a group of over 20 female experts covering a variety of topics that's really meant to help you get in touch and in tune with your soul and what lights you up, which you know we are all about on Seek the Joy podcast. So I'm going to include the link to register. It is totally free in the show notes, but you can also go to kellycollinswellness.com/year-of-u-2022. Okay, the link in the show notes is going to be so much easier to access, but I just know you're going to get so much from these sessions, and I'm just so honored to be part of it. All right, that is it. Thank you for being part of this podcast and this community over the last year. As the title says, and just like that, it's our 2021 recap. I could have spent this entire recap sharing with you all of the TV shows and movies that I watched this past year, which I'm still down to talk about and share if anyone wants to compare notes. I think this is a weird thing to share, but I think in 2022, I want to start writing down all of the shows that I watch, because by the end of the year, I don't remember like 90% of the things that I watched. I don't know. Like I said, down to compare notes. But that's it for today's episode. As always, I cannot wait to hear what you think about this one. So make sure to join the conversation on our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We are at Seek the Joy Podcast everywhere. Let me know your biggest takeaway from 2021 and what you're hoping to bring into your life in 2022. Hit follow or subscribe wherever it is that you're tuning into podcasts. And I'll see you right back here next week for another Seek the Joy Tuesday. And Happy New Year, friends. Talk to you soon.